Welcome. I'm Kinetic Symphony. I hunt down and report on mysterious and weird true stories, from glitches to the paranormal. Case file number 26, written by user ImpressivePicture. It was a night's walk, urged on by an inner voice, leading to the impression of total and absolute isolation and panic. Was this a crossover? Last night at 10:30 p.m. to 12 a.m., I was out for a walk. I live in a town with no curfew in place, so I don't believe that can excuse these experiences. It started as such. At around 10 p.m., I had a sudden urge to just go outside for a walk. This isn't the first time this has happened, as I have previously heard a voice in my head saying, "Take a walk," over and over again on multiple occasions since I was 9 years old, always at nighttime. This time it was simply a feeling and urge though, not a voice. So I got my laptop, gathered together a playlist of music and went. Immediately after leaving my house, a slight but not too noticeable feeling of paranoia kicked in. I ignored it and headed to my first destination, that being the playground about 3 blocks away from me. Along the walk, I did feel some strange feelings, which we'll go into more depth about later, of isolation and fear. But I continued on, telling myself that fear is what sets humans back from having beautiful experiences. I arrived at the playground and sat on a bench for a few minutes, being relatively calm. Not too many noticeable things here. After sitting for about 7 minutes, I got up and began walking back home, but had another destination in mind. The destination was the hill which overlooked my town and the one next over, and a bit of the Atlantic. As I neared my house, I made the decision that I was going to go to the hill. So I passed my house and turned to go down the main road. Here's where things begin to get a little strange. Keep in mind that I live in a normally busy town with cars going through all day and night. As I'm walking down the main road that cars usually are traversing down, I see absolutely no cars passing me by on the road. None. A strange feeling of paranoia began rising in me as I made my way downtown, a feeling which I'll touch on later. As I arrived downtown where the road split into a roundabout, there were still no cars, not even on the main roundabout. I took off my headphones momentarily, and I heard nothing, and I mean genuinely nothing. Absolute dead silence. It was completely quiet except for the flowing of the river which was near me. Not even the sound of the cars on the highway in the distance were present. This got me a little weirded out, but I kept moving. As I crossed the road, I looked at the big Christmas tree that my town had. The white wooden fence around it, the white lights, the benches surrounding it, all felt very strangely familiar, yet mildly uncomfortable. The feelings of paranoia began to rise, but I had not yet distinguished what they were about. I made my way up the road and turned onto the road which would lead me to the top of the hill. The feelings of paranoia kept rising as I got closer to the top of the hill, and about halfway up to the top I was able to distinguish finally what the paranoia was about. It was about being completely alone. I realized at that moment that I, from what I could tell, was completely alone. I began to feel like the reality I was experiencing wasn't even my reality, that something was wrong, that I might have shifted realities. The feelings of paranoia worsened as I got closer to the top of the hill. Eventually I reached the point where the street lamps cut off and only the dim blue moonlight lit the road in front of me, which it did quite well. This is when I heard a voice in the back of my head say, "There's no saving him now." I ignored this voice again, on the notion that fear is what causes humans to not have beautiful experiences. The feelings of paranoia were very noticeably high at this point, as I made my way down the dimly lit road to the viewing point. The viewing point was surrounded by a forest, but part of which had been cleared into flat land, so that people can play with their dogs and not have to navigate their way through woods to get to the viewing point. I walked up the couple of stairs that led to this plain, which was completely illuminated by the moon, and turned to the right to see the viewing point. The feelings of paranoia now were slightly lowered because of the beautiful sights in front of me, but they were still there. I walked over to the bench, which overlooked the view, and sat down on it. As I sat there, I noticed something. There were no birds. It was completely silent. There was nothing but the occasional wind. No cars could be heard, nothing. This, I found, was extremely unusual, even for a winter night. For the moment, though, I ignored this and kept looking at the view. It was beautiful, but something about it felt strangely familiar, yet slightly uncomfortable, like the Christmas tree. As I observed the sky, I took note of how the sky looked somewhat like a dome, and I began pondering to myself, what if none of this is real? What if all this is made just for me? I sat on these questions for a bit before pulling out my laptop to change a few songs. This is where things started to get very strange. As I pulled out my laptop, the paranoia shot back up immediately, and it was now extremely noticeable to the point where it was bothering me. At this point, strangely, both my headphones and laptop died, despite both of them being relatively well charged. Just after this, I got an immediate sensation in my body of panic. Every muscle in my body was screaming at me, "You need to leave now. You're in severe danger." Nothing caused this sensation. I wasn't hearing or seeing anything. In fact, as I said, it was completely silent. This is when I took note that there weren't any cars in the distance either. You could see 2 towns over with this view, yet I saw no cars passing at all. The absence of the cars and the birds and all sounds now were contributing to the paranoia. The paranoia, speaking of, was now overwhelming as I scrambled to bag up my things, my body still screaming at me to leave immediately. I no longer had the sensation of being alone, but the sensation of being chased or watched. I quickly zipped up my bag with my laptop and headphones and ran out of the viewing spot and onto the road. Where I ran from the viewing spot, the panic still stabbing at me, feeling like I might cry from it. I nearly slipped, and that's when I began to just slow down and walk. As I noticed that the further I got from the viewing spot, the calmer I began to become. I made my way down to the road, which would lead me back downtown and back home. That's when I looked behind. I saw nothing, but the feeling of, don't go back there, or something will happen, was there. And palpable. Funny thing is, after leaving the hill area, I started seeing cars and people. Downtown was no longer empty, and I could hear cars in the distance. Thoughts were running wildly through my mind as I made my way back downtown. A theory I had is I may have shifted realities to one where I was completely alone, and that if I had stayed there, I would have permanently been shifted to that reality. The walk back home no longer felt alone, it felt normal, as my day walks did. It felt like I was at home. That's when I took notice that when I was walking downtown, that was one of the many things that felt off. It was like it felt like I wasn't in my original reality. Everything about it was off. What do you guys think the explanation is, if there is one? Case notes, file number 26. So I'm thinking of shadow people here, reading this. So there's nothing at all suggesting that you had died here. The catalyst is unknown. But I brought up the shadow people because of a few experiences I read prior. One I narrated here, actually. I forget the case file. I think case file number 7. I'll have to check. Anyways, there are people stuck in the limbo realm between occupied realities. That's what I think shadow people are. I think this ties into simulation theory too, where effectively you loaded into an empty server. You were not meant to be there. This gave you a truly overwhelming sense of loneliness, being trapped into oblivion, forgotten, erased almost. A sense of despair. Your conscious mind couldn't quite piece together what was wrong, but your subconscious knew this isn't right. It makes you wonder if there aren't a bunch of lost souls stuck in realms or servers they aren't meant to be in, all alone. None of this explains how you escaped though and transitioned back into an occupied universe. I'm glad you did though. Maybe a developer or game dev just moved you out. Of course, why they wouldn't do this with the other lost souls there, I don't know. maybe it's not as simple as that. Maybe this is what a guardian angel is too. Basically, the developers or moderators are paying attention, but there's just so many people that they can get lost and forget some people, or just some slip through the cracks and they can't be found. If simulation theory is true with quantum immortality and multiverse theory, then perhaps there are just so many servers running concurrently that they can't keep track of them all. I don't know. It's a very interesting thought, though, I think. I'd also touch on those inner voices, just saying my instinct is they're sort of like cheat sheets from your real hosts in the world, kind of relaying messages, not directly, but sort of, without you knowing where they're from. Yeah, just an idea. And that concludes our case files for the night. If you enjoyed them, and my narration of them, consider leaving a like, and also subscribing. I upload Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 6 p.m. EST with new case files all the time. I'll see you there.